Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this webinar presentation by the National Catholic Educational Association, the State of Catholic Education. I'm Andrea Kopp, Assistant Director of Professional Development for NCEA, and I'm happy to be your moderator and your host today. Just a few housekeeping notes as we get started. Please note that your microphone connections have been muted. If you have questions or comments during today's presentation, please send those through the chat box that appears in your GoToWebinar control panel. To ask a question, use your mouse to click into the blank box area, type your question using your keyboard, and then click send. The webinar presentation will last about an hour today, and there will be opportunities for questions and answers. You can post questions or comments for our presenter at any time. We'll also be live tweeting during today's webinar, so you can join the conversation by using the hashtag NCEA webinars, and be sure to tag @NCEA Talk. Immediately following the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a brief survey about your experience today, and I thank you in advance for providing us with this valuable feedback. You will receive an email tomorrow with instructions on accessing this recording, the presentation materials, and a certificate of attendance. You can also download those files now from the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel. Let us begin, as we do all things, in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our presenter, Dr. Thomas Burnford, President and CEO of NCEA. Welcome to our program, Dr. Burnford. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Appreciate it. So good afternoon, everybody. Looking forward to discussing with you the state of Catholic education in the United States. Encourage you all to ask questions as we go along through the chat box, and we'll endeavor to answer them in this presentation and this discussion. Again, my name is Tom Burnford. I have the privilege of serving as President and CEO of the National Catholic Educational Association for the past year and a half. One of the best things about my job is I get to travel around the country and see Catholic education in action around the country. So what is the state of Catholic education? It's tremendous. This very day, for example, we have teachers who have 35, 45 students in their classroom in Texas, in the Diocese of Corpus Christi, which is more than is normal and hard work. But given that one of the schools in Corpus Christi was destroyed by Hurricane Harvey, that is how communities that are Catholic schools are making it work, welcoming brothers and sisters from other schools, and helping to continue the mission, even amidst the tragedy and the devastation wrought by Hurricane Harvey. And by the way, we've been on the phone all day today working with and talking to people in Florida, where Irma has just been through. And we got some damage in schools down in Miami as well. So a lot of things going on there. But let's begin. Let's talk about the state of Catholic education. In the United States, there are 6,400 Catholic schools that provide academically excellent and faith-filled education for 2 million students nationwide. There are plenty of pieces of good news. We have great test scores. We have high school graduation rates well above the average, high college attendance rates, and other impressive data that show that these schools consistently outperform other schools in both the private and public sector. So we have a great product. We serve many, many students through many schools. Let's look at some of these outcomes more specifically. For example, the math mean score in the SAT, Catholic students are 532 and public school students are 487. Again, these are national numbers across the board. Individual schools are going to differ, but overall, we do very well in math, we do very well in reading, as you can see there, and in writing, where there's an even larger gap between public school students and counterparts. If you look at the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, you have reading scores where 63% of Catholic school seniors perform at or above proficiency, compared to the public schools where it's 37%. So reading and writing are one area in particular where we know that Catholic schools and the curriculums that we have really outshine other educational offerings. Math, we're ahead, but math is a continued area where we need to work on. Our math scores show that 48% of seniors perform at or above proficiency compared to 25%. That's not good enough, so it's better than our public school counterparts, but not good enough. We're working there. And then, just as an interesting stat, of the private schools that are recognized as national blue ribbon schools, for example, in 2016, they give out 50 blue ribbons to private schools across the country. The Department of Education does. 37 of those schools were Catholic schools. The vast majority are Catholic schools. And hopefully those of you calling in from around the country either know of blue ribbon schools, are from blue ribbon schools, or have blue ribbon schools in your diocese. It's a great honor, and we're looking forward to this year's crop coming up as well. Some more good news outcomes. And these are just, by the way, in some sense, let's think of these as talking points when we're talking to people about what we do, because we need to be able to tell the story to the entire population, the 326 million people in the country, that Catholic schools have graduation rates of 99% compared to 82% in public schools. That may not seem like a huge gap, but if you go to various parts, particularly urban areas of the country, that gap is much, much larger, particularly for Catholic schools in urban areas. The graduation rate can be double what it is in public schools. And the more disadvantaged a child is, the greater the relative achievement gains he or she experiences in a Catholic school. We have data to back that up. Catholic school graduates have a higher earning potential than public school graduates, and our college completion rate is basically 62% of Catholic high school graduates get a bachelor's degree or higher by the time 8 years out of high school. And that number compares to 31% of public school students. So clear success in our high schools, preparing students for success in college. And then we also know that Catholic school students are more likely to pray daily, attend church more often, and retain a Catholic identity as an adult and donate more to the church. This is a really important point, because part of our mission, a key part of our mission, is to form the next generation of Catholics, not just for the church, but to form the next generation of Catholics as missionary disciples, as the Holy Father Pope Francis is calling us to, so that we can go out and, to be frank, evangelize and change the world and bring about the gospel, which is at the very heart of our mission. So again, stepping back a little bit, I've given you a highlight of some of the positives and strengths of Catholic schools. I want to refer now to a specific document that the NCEA produces and has produced for many years, which is called the U.S. Catholic Elementary and Secondary School Statistical Report. Currently, we have the 2016-17 version. Later in the fall, we'll have the 17-18 version, but we have to get on all the numbers. So let's talk about this document. I've got a copy in front of me. Andrew's just put up on the chat where you can get a copy. We do send a copy to all superintendents when it comes out as part of their membership, but this is a wealth of data. It's the only study in its kind that regularly, year to year, tracks the facts, the figures, the enrollments, the school choice programs, all sorts of stuff about Catholic schools. And much of the data in this webinar is going to come from there. So it's really an overview of the historical dimensions. Many of the charts go back to 2007, but we have the data that goes way back. Then it gives demographic data, staffing, school student characteristics, diversity, special services, funding saved, lots of data in this. Let's see, it's 50, 51, 52 pages. So not the sort of thing you can read all at once, but it's an important tool for us as we plan as Catholic educators around the country. And what's the research process that we use? So this is based upon census data that we gather from each of the 176 dioceses in the United States, from all of the schools offices around. And, you know, we are so grateful to superintendents and principals who send in this data. A lot of times it's hard to take the time to fill out a survey and to send in numbers and facts and figures, but it really is valuable, because without this, we can't track what's happening in the country. And if we don't know what's happening, we don't know, for example, that the number of Latino students in Catholic schools is low compared to the number of Latino Catholics in the United States. If we don't know that, then we can't seek to address it and to reach out. If we don't know that enrollment is growing here and there in parts of Omaha or parts of California or Arizona or Florida, but not so much in other parts and other states, then we can't redirect efforts. So we're really grateful to everyone who collects the data and helps collate it into this unique and very important report. Let's go a little deeper into some of this data. So the total number of U.S. Catholic schools, 6,429, and this is as of last year. We know that last academic year that just ended, June 30, there are 5,224 elementary and 1,205 secondary schools. 20 new schools opened this year. I visited a couple just the other week. I visited a wonderful new school in Missouri, just outside Kansas City, St. Michael the Archangel, brand new high school with 390 students in it, filled with joy. It's great to be there. They have a director of, I think it's aerospace engineering, who's a retired trainer for one of the airlines. So they have all sorts of interesting programs there. And also was in Idaho visiting a new elementary school there in Idaho, which was a wonderful experience. You can read all about that in our upcoming edition of Momentum. 20 new schools opened this year, and that's great. But we also know there were 96 consolidations and closings. And the trend is that since 2007, it's only 10 years ago, almost 1,400 Catholic schools have closed or consolidated. Now, some of those are consolidated, as in coming together or merging into a new entity. Sometimes that new entity is larger than the two entities it went into. But we also know the reality that we are losing Catholic schools. This is a serious issue, a serious problem. If there are any superintendents on the call, that's what we talked about at the Catholic Leadership Summit in Indianapolis last October, and we continue to talk about it. Much is being done to ensure that every parent who wants a Catholic school not only knows about the opportunity, but has the option. So we are losing schools, and that is something we need to address and continue to look at. At the same time, 27% of the schools have waiting lists. So part of this is, where are the school buildings located? And in some sense, we have too many buildings in some parts of the country and not enough in other parts of the country. Hence, a new school building just being built, as I mentioned, in Missouri. There's a new one in Billings, Montana I was at also. So our Catholic school staffing ratio in the elementary middle, it's 12:1, secondary 11:1. This means that students get a great education and love and care from competent, qualified teachers. So another way to look at the enrollment decline is not just in the number of schools, but also the 19% of Catholic schools have closed and consolidated. And why is that? It's difficult for dioceses to continue to provide the financial assistance required and also to keep the tuition low. This, we know, is a challenge. Tuition remains the single largest obstacle to parents' ability to enroll their children. We know this. This is why so many dioceses and foundations are generously contributing to tuition assistance programs. I want to encourage anybody, if you're thinking about this, it's always better, or generally better, to put funding into a Catholic school at the beginning of the school year by providing tuition assistance to families, particularly new families, to those families who wouldn't be in your school if it wasn't for that extra piece of tuition assistance. Use funds to put money into the school at the beginning of the year through tuition assistance, and then you will have less deficit at the end of the year, which needs to be covered either through some diocesan or parish assistance. So there are many tricks and techniques to maximize enrollment and most efficiently use the funds that we have. Again, I point out here that private philanthropy does a huge amount to help poorer families to meet the ever-rising tuition costs, but this has not been enough across the board. We have strong demand and enthusiasm for our schools, again, the waiting lists and the new schools, but we also face some significant challenges. let's look at the actual number of students. In the 1960s, we had 5.2 million students in 13,000 schools. Now, the 1960s was a time of great vibrancy in church, and many Catholics and many schools. But in the 70s and 80s, there was a steep decline in the number of schools, number of factors, shifting populations moving out west and to the south, changing in church attendance patterns, and an incredible decline in the number of religious teachers, which therefore meant that salaried staff were needed, which raised tuition. So by the 1990s, we'd gone from 5.2 to 2.5 million in 8,719 schools. And in the 90s to 2000, there was a slight enrollment increase, though there was some closing of schools. In 2002, an economic downturn, employment, and the decline has sort of continued. So, and again, since 2007, the enrollment has declined by almost 450,000. These are not insignificant numbers. You know, a question just came up on the screen, and I'll just take a minute to look at that. So this question from the audience is, what is the more concerning trend? Cost tuition or faith formation of faculty and families? So, I mean, to look at that, if you look across the country, tuition has been rising and cost has been rising. And you know, in one sense, cost should not necessarily rise, but cost should rise, because it's right that we pay our teachers as fair a wage as possible, and we pay our teachers who are competent and qualified and do great work in our schools. So naturally, over time, the cost is going to rise, and we are no longer running a system which was created on the backs of and supported by religious who basically didn't take a salary. So cost should go up in one sense because of the quality product we maintain, as evidenced by the test scores I just talked about. The faith formation in faculty, that is also very important, because I want to stress that the heart of a Catholic school is the proclamation of the good news of Jesus Christ, not only to the students, but to the families. Catholic schools are communities of faith, involving everybody: principal, teachers, faculty, staff, parishioners, parents, and students. And it's around the community of faith, ultimately around the Eucharistic table. It's around the community of faith. The faith is passed on, and disciples are formed, and our mission is fulfilled. So, a concerning trend, you know, I would say both. We need to find funds for tuition assistance, and we need to ensure that faith is at the foremost and heart of what we do. So that's sort of an attempt at that question. Let's get back to the slides. Moving along here, it's got to click back there. School staffing. Currently, there are 2,470 sisters, 743 brothers, 784 priests and deacons, and 115,000 lay women and 33,000 lay men, for a total of 152,000 people working in Catholic schools. As you can see, 97% are lay, and almost 2.5% to 3% are religious clergy. By the way, if you go back to the 60s, you could flip those numbers, right? And by the way, if you go back to the 50s, 60s, it was 150,000 people working in Catholic schools, but for over twice the number of schools. So what's interesting, if you look over the past 30, 40 years, is that the number of people working in schools has stayed the same, whereas the number of students served and the number of buildings that we have in operation has decreased dramatically. One may say, why is that? Well, it's not just because the nuns were wonderful in terms of their teaching. It's because the very nature of education has changed and advanced significantly over the past number of years. And in one sense, it requires more professional staff to provide a high quality education such as we do today. More wraparound subjects, more provision to meet the various needs of students, whether they be regular learners or exceptional learners. So that 152,000 I see as a strong point, that we are engaging a significant number of adults in helping pass on the faith to almost 2 million children. So that's just an overview of school staffing. Tuition costs. Since 2007, elementary school tuition has increased by more than 40%, and secondary school tuition by 43%. That may sound like a lot, but if you look at how much the cost of living has increased, it's not actually that huge of an increase over 10 years. Our tuition and cost you can see below, elementary and secondary. These obviously vary across the country. I would point out, for your thinking, excuse me, I'll just go back to that one. There is a difference between tuition and cost. What I would suggest is that it is very important that schools ensure that parents understand the cost of the education that their child is receiving. When I go to back to school night, which is actually next week at my school, the pastor and principal are very clear on saying, we are spending, and in my school I think it's about $8,000, spending about $8,000 on the education of your child. But we are charging you $7,000. We are charging you a tuition that is significantly less than the cost. And indeed, some of you are getting tuition assistance on top of that. So I want you to understand the quality of the product your children are receiving. The value of it is $8,000. And please now thank those who are making up the gap, primarily the parish that subsidizes a school that is covering $1,000 per child. So I think that's an important communication strategy, because parents need to know the full financial realities for the education of their child. Whatever tuition is, they need to know the cost, and they need to know, to be frank, who to thank for making this work. If we look at it the other way, Catholic schools are a gift to the nation. If you say that the average public school spends about $11,000 per kid per year, and you times that by the number of students in Catholic schools, we are basically saving taxpayers $20 billion each year. If we did not do what we do, the state would have to take on those additional students. Now, we don't do it to save the state money. We do it because we are called to pass on the faith to future generations and offer a Catholic education to all those who wish to receive it. So, but I think it's interesting to know, and this is a great line, by the way, at a party, if you're at a party, do you know that the schools that I'm involved with save taxpayers $20 billion or whatever it is in your particular state? It's easy to find out. And that is part of the impact of church in support of our society and country as one of the benefits. Let's look a little bit more at student success. Graduation rates. In Catholic schools, again, 99% graduation rates across the country. For other religious, private, independent schools, 97, 98%. Non-sectarian schools, truly independent schools, 95%. And then public schools, 82%. When I was in Washington, D.C. A number of years ago, the graduation rate for the D.C. public school system was about 48, 49%. And Catholic schools in the city were about 98, 90, 99%. That is a clear testament to the work that we do. And you can look at the numbers there in terms of college attendance as well. There are 220 Catholic colleges and universities in the country, and this is not reflected in this number, but many Catholic high schools most Catholic high schools provide students with an opportunity to go on to great Catholic colleges and universities. And by the way, just as a sidebar, when we talk about Catholic schools, I wonder why we think so often in terms of K-12. I think we should be thinking as a country that Catholic education is not a K-12 issue, it's a K-16 and beyond issue. That nowadays the importance of a bachelor's degree, the normalcy, is a critical piece, and I think we should be thinking, and in fact NCEA is in discussions and talking with people at the college and university level about how do we form people in the faith beyond high school, but all the way through from kindergarten, indeed pre-K, all the way through their bachelor's degree and beyond. Just a thought in terms of our planning and how we go. Okay, let's keep going here. In terms of these 1.9 million students, 18.4 are non-Catholic students, 21% are racial minorities, 17% Hispanic Latino, and 78% of Catholic schools serve students with a diagnosed disability. You know, it's interesting. I was in this high school, St. Michael the Archangel, and one of the main rooms of the school is basically a cafe. And the cafe is run by students with disabilities in the school who run the cafe. It's not the kitchen, but it's a cafe where people can get coffees and donuts and stuff during the day, run by students with disabilities who are learning life skills in a practical way through running a cafe within the school. I thought that was a neat example. And then we know that 4.6% of students have a diagnosed disability, and they are being served in Catholic schools. By the way, an interesting question. If we look at the first statistic there, 18% of students are non-Catholics. I sometimes wonder about a question there. Is that a number that we want to see increase or decrease in Catholic schools year to year? Over time, it's been increasing slowly. The number of non-Catholics served in Catholic schools has been increasing. But I think it's just an interesting, I'm not going to answer the question, I'm just going to pose it, because I think it's an interesting question to ask. In light of what the Holy Father is talking about, for example, in the Joy of the Gospel, do we want that 18.4%? Do we want it to be 18.5 next year or 18.3? Interesting sort of question to think about in terms of our mission, who we're called to serve, and how we're called to serve them. We do know that we want the overall enrollment to rise, because what we have is such a gift to families who are able to participate in these schools. Anyway, just throw that out as a question. So parental choice. Parental choice has to do really with who's paying for the education, to be frank, of my kids. So as of now, about 31 states in the District of Columbia provide some form of financial assistance from the government to parents to help them choose a private or faith-based education for their children. And that's a significant number of states and DC, and that has been growing over time and growing significantly. There are currently 61 publicly financed programs, vouchers, scholarships, tax relief available in those areas, and efforts are underway in several additional states to enact legislation. Illinois just passed a scholarship tax credit program, which is tremendous. There's one in the District of Columbia, which is the only federal voucher program, the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. There are a number of different programs, and there are about 400,000 students currently in Catholic schools who receive some form of assistance through local funds. You know, my friends, that's just right, okay? I think it's just right. Ultimately, parents are the ones who should be able to choose the best school for their child. The government does not have a right to monopolize education. The government does have a duty to provide public education, but at the same time, that education should not be restricted in any way, shape, or form. The reality we face is that the United States, and by the way, there are only about, I think about 60 or 70 countries in the world, out of all the countries in the world, that do this, doesn't really have the right to restrict the funds that come from everybody, from you and me and from everybody. Those funds are restricted to students who go to public schools. And you know, last time I checked, my Lucy, Sammy, and Molly, they were members of the public, right? They're members of the public. They go to Catholic school, but they are restricted from benefiting from the funds that come from everybody for education, because those funds only go to public and charter schools. And to be honest, that's unjust. And the church has come out and said it's unjust. And that's what we're working on in terms of the parental choice movement, with great success in the states and with very minimal success at the federal level, even at this time. We have worked very hard with the current administration, who has said that they are very supportive of parental choice. And by the way, that parental choice is meaningless without funding following the child to the school that the parents choose. However, we're stuck right now. Not much is happening in Washington for various reasons, and this is a tough climb for any sort of federal legislation or national legislation. But a lot is happening at the states. So if you're out there, I encourage you to think about and become informed about what's happening in your state in terms of school choice legislation. So let's talk a little bit about the mission of Catholic education. I've touched on this a little bit. Our goal is not only to prepare our Catholic school students for this life, but to prepare them for the next life in heaven. I will say, by the way, that we just did some market research and we tested some of our language. That language, preparing students for success in this life and in the next and getting them to heaven, that language does not work with millennials, by the way. We got some pretty strong reactions to that. I thought that was pretty interesting. We need to find new language to talk about the value of what we do, while there is a reality that we are focused on getting our kids into heaven. And so the Catholic Church and schools, they exist for us to do this work and to be the living messengers of God's purpose from generation. This is where missionary discipleship comes in. Pope Francis is clear. We need to view all church institutions and structures through the lens of a missionary option. And my friends, I'm spending a lot of time reading The Joy of the Gospel and trying to think and ponder, what does the Holy Father mean when he says, go and form missionary disciples? I feel like I've got an idea of what discipleship means in terms of my work with the Lord, what I'm trying to do with my kids to help them grow close to the Lord. But it's not just about discipleship, it's about missionary discipleship. And that's a big deal, and I'm trying to figure out what the Holy Father means by that and how that applies to Catholic school. And I invite you to think about that with me and to say, how does your school form missionary disciples? How is your school a missionary community of parents, faculty, and leadership and parish? How do we do that? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And then, how does that align to what parents are telling us about what they want for Catholic schools, which isn't always faith? And how do we reach out to all parents and invite them to an education that forms the whole student? So there's something you can can think about in terms of that important call. So, okay, I'm going to take a little question here. Here's the question that just popped up. What effect has the growth of charter schools had on the decline of Catholic schools? Okay, so if you go back to the year 2000, which is when charter schools started their growth, there are almost exactly the same number of students in charter schools today as the number of students less in Catholic schools. Now, it's not a one-to-one correlation. We didn't just have kids leave Catholic schools and go to charter schools. It just so happens that the number, and I'm not exactly sure what that number is right now, I can't remember, it's a significant number, is very, very similar. So charter schools have had an impact on Catholic schools. We know that charter schools, in some sense, can look like, can feel like Catholic schools, except they're free because they're paid for by government funds, which again, funds that are unfairly restricted to public education. Charter schools, by the way, are public schools. They're just self-managed. So there is a correlation. You'll notice many charter schools having uniforms. Indeed, uniforms that look like Catholic school uniforms. You'll notice charter schools promoting a set of values, as we promote a set of values. In fact, we call them virtues, they may call them values. So there are clear similarities in structures of discipline, in focus of curriculum, in ability to self-manage and be creative, a great strength of Catholic schools. So it's a significant piece. We're not against charter schools. We want all schools and all to grow and serve children. We want to utilize healthy competition so that we can all improve ultimately to serve children. At the same time, let's be clear, our mission is fundamentally different than charter schools because we seek to educate the whole student, spirit, mind, and body. And we seek to educate that student with a vision that proclaims the spiritual reality of God and church and heaven and salvation as the reality that it is. And that is something that charter schools don't do and can't do. And it's not part of their mission. Fundamentally different. And this is where people can get confused because there are times when charter school can look like and feel like even a Catholic school. We do know that a number of Catholic school educators have gone to work in charter schools, and you can look at that in many different ways. It's a blessing for those charter schools. At the same time, it can be a loss in some cases for Catholic schools. So there's a little answer to that question. So looking to the future, one of the things that we try to do at NCEA is to sort of serve as a voice for Catholic school education in the country, not in a policy way, but to really tell the good story, tell the good news story of what we're doing and what Catholic schools are doing. So one of the questions we say is, how can we build enrollment in Catholic schools across the country? By telling the story of our academics, our safe schools, and our formation. And this is why we do this data report that's been the basis of much of this webinar, because we can tell the story and talk about the good things that are happening and communicate that more broadly. We can also, and we do work on the growth of parental choice programs. Sister Dale McDonald on our team is constantly driving up to Capitol Hill, talking to legislators, talking to the Department of Education to help people understand. At the same level, we have created a series of flyers for parents. You can find them on our website. They come out each month. We just sent some out. I think actually they may go out this Thursday, that a school can put into their flyers, and it talks to parents about being ambassadors for Catholic schools. It gives them some of the stats that we've been through. It talks to them about parental choice. It just helps parents be ambassadors for schools. And our bread and butter is really to provide best practices and formation for Catholic educators, for the 150,000 people in member schools, whether it's through our convention, through our different workshops, through webinars like this, through the 600 resources on our website, through our Momentum magazine. All the stuff we do is designed to help a teacher grow in their profession, grow in their ministry, grow as a missionary disciple, and have the tools to do the critically important work that they do. And then we work very closely with diocesan school leaders, working with succession planning, leadership formation, and helping, forming the next generation of leaders who will continue this critical and important mission. So these are some of the things that we're working on right now. So that's actually the end of the presentation. We'll leave this right here and just want to take a chance and get some questions in here. So please ask any questions you might have. We'll take a minute to look at any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Burnford. We have a few questions that have come in. Can you comment on how schools and parishes might more effectively partner to get more of the students that attend Mass into Catholic schools and more of our students in Catholic schools to be active members of our parishes?
Sure. So that's a two-way street, and this gets to the very sort of nature of what is the focus of a parish community. And by the way, if you've got a parish school, that school's a ministry of that parish. It's a monster of a ministry. It's probably the biggest one. It's probably the one with the biggest budget. But how does the overall mission of the parish relate and impact the school? And the Holy Father in Joy of the Gospel is very clear. The parishes are where it's at because they have a chance through leadership to look at their ministries, all of them, including the school, through the lens of missionary discipleship. And therefore, what we need in our parishes is a unified vision of the mission of the church, a unified vision of missionary discipleship, and then how does the school play into that? How does the religious education play into that? How does youth ministry and social service play into it? Then you're going to have consistent messaging going out. A lot of it, of course, is communication. Good communication to parents about the option of Catholic school, making sure that parents know about tuition assistance where available. And then, in the school, there has to be the encouragement, the building of the faith of the individual parents and families. Father John Belmonte has done tremendous work in the Diocese of Joliet. He is a superintendent of schools. He's done tremendous work in terms of encouraging Catholic school families to take their children to Mass every weekend. And he has now data to show that about 80% of school families are attending Mass on weekends, which is significantly higher than other populations within the parish. And he's done it simply through intentionality within the school system in terms of faith formation and proclaiming the importance of the Eucharist. So I think communication is a big deal of it, and then a common vision would be another deal. That's one answer to that question, Andrea.
Thank you. We had another question related to a comment you made earlier about where Catholic schools are growing and where there may be too many. Someone asked what suggestions you have for a market that's saturated with Catholic schools that all seem to be vying for the same market share.
That's a great question. So I think the problem is vying for the same market share because my guess is wherever you are and however many Catholic schools you have, there are enough kids around, right? Now, if you're in a retirement community, that's, specifically that's not the case, but pretty much everywhere else, there are a lot of people out. We have 1.9 million students in Catholic schools. We have 60+ million Catholics in the United States and 326 million people. There's enough people around. The issue is, what assumptions are we making about who Catholic schools are for, right? In the old days, 40, 50 years ago, it was really simple. Father said, you shall send your children to Catholic school and they will turn up on Monday, September 8th, right? There was no option for Catholic families attending Mass. It's totally different nowadays. Excuse me. We have to identify what we offer to parents. We have to think about what parents want. We have to meet the needs of parents and actively go out and welcome them into our communities. And an interesting point here, on one of your webinars actually, Andrea, we heard statistics about how millennial parents today, okay, make most of their decision-making process about Catholic schools before they ever step foot in the school or talk to anybody. They're doing it online. How are we reaching out to millennial students who are now having children who simply don't use the ways of marketing for Catholic schools that we may have been relying on for decades? So part of it is, who do we reach out to? Who are we intentionally reaching out to? And to be frank, what is the missionary option that we choose in our Catholic schools?
Thank you for that. A related question, not only to those comments, but to an earlier statistic that you cited about diversity. What are some ways in which our Catholic schools can be more welcoming to diverse students and families?
Right. That's a tremendous question. In our market research, one of the overwhelming facts was that people not involved with Catholic schools assume and believe that Catholic schools are only for Catholics. Simple as that. We have to correct that misperception. In a similar way, there are many people who believe that Catholic schools are elitist, that they serve only the wealthy. This, again, is not true, but there are perceptions, and I would suggest that we need to do a much better job in communicating the diversity that exists and in growing that diversity in any situation where it does not authentically exist. If we're talking about reaching out to Latino families, we need to get into the community. We need to welcome and reach out with a respect, knowledge, and understanding of the particular culture that we're reaching out to. That is tremendous work. That's good work. It's not always easy work. And we need to be intentional about increasing diversity in our school because we know students learn better in a diverse environment. By the way, we also know that parents in general, this is our raw market research, want their students to be in a diverse school. They want their students to grow up as world citizens, is one phrase that came up. Citizens of the world who interact with different cultures and different populations. And that's a great opportunity for us.
Thank you. We have a question about the availability of this presentation after the fact. You can download the PowerPoint from the GoToWebinar handout section now, and you will be getting the taped presentation within 24 hours. And Dr. Burnford, if you have time for one more question,
Sure.
someone had asked about how they can connect with NCEA to promote the good news stories that are happening in their area. What support can NCEA offer them?
Oh, sure. So I'm all about good news stories because, to be honest, the good news stories they don't live here in in our offices, Andrea. They live out in the field where people are doing the work. So we do a lot of Twitter stuff. We got Ryan working Twitter and Facebook all the time. We're at #NCEA Talk. Our Momentum magazine is filled with good stories, good news stories. So send them in, reach out to our Marcom department, Marketing Communications. Tell us your good stories, and we can push them out nationally. At the same time, we know marketing is local. And really, in many ways, enrollment grows when parents go out and they're talking to other parents at the grocery store or in different capacities. So I got 4 extra kids into my Catholic school through the work that my wife and I do, simply in our neighborhood, just talking to other families, and it's great work. And that's the basic way of how it happens. So that's sort of a short answer there. But we want to hear good stories. Give us the good news stories of the tremendous things that are happening in your schools. And I speak now to the audience because that's the beauty of what we're doing. The localized nature of Catholic education, the fact that we have local level authority, that we don't have huge systemic cookie cutter franchises, it's a great benefit to us because that allows for the creativity and the Spirit of God to work at the local level. And I want to hear more of those stories and talk about them to other people. So thank you.
Excellent, and that concludes our questions for today. If you have not done so already, you can download your certificate of attendance in the handout section of the control panel there. If we didn't get to your question or you think of another question, I'll be glad to forward those to Dr. Burnford. You can contact me directly. I want to remind you that I'll be sending you an email within 24 hours with accessing all of the presentation today. I'd like to thank our audience for their active participation and especially thank Dr. Burnford for all that you've shared with us. Did you have any final comments for our audience before we conclude?
Just thank everybody. I really appreciate everybody's time to listen in to this, and mostly thank you for the work that you do informing the students in your care at whatever level, in whatever way that you're working in Catholic school education. I love my work because I get to work with teachers, principals, and see kids, and it's the greatest thing because we're educating the whole student and we're changing lives one kid at a time. So thank you so much.
And thank you. I invite all of you to visit our website at ncea.org to see listings both for upcoming webinars as well as our professional development activities. I thank you all again and may you enjoy a blessed evening.